right, good morning. Welcome to the Thurston County Board of County Commissioners Board Work Session for Wednesday, May 29th, 2024. It's 9:04 a.m. My name is Ty Mentor, Chair of the Board. To my left is Vice Chair Commissioner Wayne Fournier, Commissioner Gary Edwards. We have Commissioners Emily Klaus, Carolina Mejia participating on Zoom, County Manager Leonard Hernandez, and Assistant County Managers Robin Campbell and Rob Gelder. For public virtual attendance, you may follow along on Thurston County YouTube channel. We have a 3-hour session. We'll probably have a short recess in the middle. A few topics to take up. Item 1 is courthouse renovation project update. Is that where we're starting, County Manager?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and who's taking the lead? Okay.
I want to thank Rick. Come on up, Rick. Appreciate you putting the time and effort together in meeting with the stakeholders. Commissioners, the question and the item that Rick presented in last, but Rick, why don't you introduce yourself for the sake of the viewers?
Thank you, Commissioners. I'm Rick Thomas, Central Services Capital Projects Planning Manager.
The discussion was around the security layout, and the options that were presented had some operational increase in staffing. And so the commission and I asked Rick to go back and talk to the stakeholders and discuss what options they could come up with that would be staff neutral, and he's ready to present on that. And also there was a question about the increase in space from the remodel. So he has some information that he can cover as to how much the renovation is going to increase space for the various different groups. Rick, I'll pass over to you.
Thank you, County Manager. On the first item there, the security screening, I did go back and meet with all of the different stakeholder groups on Monday, May the 20th. And during the conversation and discussion with the group, the prosecuting attorney's office had indicated that they did some additional research in regards to the requirements for screening at Building 1. And as it turns out, there are some statutes that prohibit the screening of individuals unless it's going into a building where there are actual court proceedings. And so what concluded from that meeting is that we cannot put screening into Building 1. So the consensus of the group at that point was then to do screening at Building 2 and Building 3, which would be for just the district court and the superior court, since they do have operational courtrooms within those buildings. The configuration of the screening stations will be slightly different than what we have right now, just to give a little bit more room for queuing and just personnel. But it's going to be very similar to the setup that we have right now. And so from the perspective of operations, it can be the same as it is right now. I do want to point out, though, that during the conversation with particularly the court staff, but some of the other groups that are within Buildings 2 and 3, they have indicated that they would like some further conversations with the county manager in regards to security staff personnel. So that's really kind of the report out. We are in a situation where, should the project continue to go forward, we will just have the 2 security screening stations as they are right now, just configured slightly differently. So are there any questions in regards to that?
And commissioners, to Rick's comment, my team's working with Rick and that stakeholder group so I can come out and talk to them and hear what their thoughts are about need for increased security, etc. But I do appreciate you bringing forward an option that's staff neutral currently.
I guess on the square footage, don't we charge rent space based on square footage? Isn't that how individual entities are charged for the building space?
They are charged on a square footage basis to pay into the building reserves rates, and I think Robin can certainly expand upon that.
So I guess we haven't had, I don't know, adequate funding to pay for it the way it is. How are we going to change that? How are we going to be able to handle that extra cost? Because I don't know how many square feet are being added, but there are square footage being added and attributed to the different groups up there, and their bill is gonna go up for that problem, so.
So the indirect costs that you're referring to, building occupants pay into the, building reserve fund, and then we also use square footage to allocate costs for, utilities and repairs and, other such items. The plan has been all along, since you're not really adding square footage, you're adding square footage for any individual office and departments, but those buildings, with the exception of building 2, is gonna become bigger. But we're not gonna have anyone in building 6, let's say. So the costs are really shifting rather than adding a bunch of new costs. And we had all of the people in this building who had been in those buildings that are not paying into the building reserve rates. Instead, we're paying rent. So the real cost increase came with the move into the atrium.
So there won't be any difference in cost then?
I'm not saying there won't be any difference in cost, but it shouldn't be a big increase, because we're paying now.
Right.
Yeah,
It's just gonna be a little more, I guess.
a little different.
Okay.
Okay, so on the question of the security issue,
Yes.
where we kind of landed, is there any other questions from the board? I feel like I do have questions, they're just not
I'm in the same boat. Like, I'm
materializing in
trying
my
to
head.
picture the, like, so you're saying no change in security setup then?
There's no change in the security setups for building 2 and 3. We will be working with the prosecuting attorney's office and with pretrial services to talk about, I'm gonna say potentially security enhancements to building 1. It will not include screening, but it will probably include, maybe a kiosk call-in system or something like that, maybe something that's similar to building 5 if you wanted to go to prosecuting attorney civil group in building 5. Might be a little bit more enhanced so that we have a camera and whatnot, so there's a little more security there.
And then that courtyard, no fences, no,
I guess,
How much does that help with the, I know putting a fence around a lot was like $1 million. I don't know I can't remember what the price point was for what you guys proposed, but it's
Correct.
pretty expensive.
It was at least $500,000 up to $1 million, so yes, this,
what would it cost to have the walkway, the covered walkway from the prosecutor, from Superior Court to District Court? Just that distance there, I don't know what it is, 75 feet? To have the security be located in one spot.
like where that coffee stand used to be
Yeah,
or
like where the
something?
coffee stand is. So the public would enter there, and that would be fenced off, though, that walkway, just on one side. All you need is some kind of cyclone fence. I mean, it's not gonna be super, super, super secure, but I mean, we'd be able to see if somebody runs up and hands something through the fence. I mean, the officers there would. And just have one security point, and then people would walk down the walkway, the covered walkway, to go to District Court. They'd go to the right into Superior Court. And why couldn't we get by with fewer security officers and do the same job than having 2 separate locations?
we did look at that particular option, and quite honestly, that one became cost prohibitive from the perspective of we would need to have a larger area than just kind of where the coffee shop is due to queuing 3 buildings into one location like that.
We can't do 3 into 1, we can only do 2 into 1 now, you're saying.
Well, the way that I understand that the regulations are set up is that building one cannot have its own separate screening. But if there were some other campus-wide place that everyone came into, then you could potentially have the whole campus be secured rather than just the individual two buildings. And that, again, that was option A that we looked at, with that being a part of building one, and then everything connecting from building one back to building 2 and 3. We did look at the potential option of doing some sort of a office security annex at building 3. However, that became very expensive because we had to build it out so that it would actually come into the courtyard area, the plaza part of it, where we have the plantings. And again, once we get into that area, we have lots of other regulations that come into play, such as stormwater retention, and other types of upgrades that we would have to do in order to make that particular scenario come into play. And I apologize, I don't remember the exact dollar difference, but I mean, that was like at least a couple of $1 million difference to be able to have to build that kind of a structure at that point. And then build the kind of the fenced walkways back to building 1 and to building 2.
I want to make sure I understand, because I thought you said you can't screen at building 1, but you can screen the whole campus, but the plan to screen the whole campus was through building 1. So what is it you can't do? I'm unclear.
So if we were going to secure all building 1, 2, and 3 together as a group of campus buildings,
Yes.
and we had a single point of entry for that, you could have any of the buildings actually be that particular point, and you could consider all of the buildings to be a part of a campus of security.
That's not what we were planning.
Well, that was the option, that was the one option that we looked at, but it costs more, and there was gonna have to be more staffing. And so, security staffing. And so, when we started looking at a solution that didn't increase the staffing,
I thought there was kind of wasn't there a debate about whether there needed to be increased staffing in that model? I mean, you have 2 people at a security point, you have additional 2 people that can move freely and roam around and make sure things are secure and be nimble to be called anyway, and that's 4. And that's what we have now, with you have 2 separate points, you have 2 and 2.
yes, that is correct. However, as we talked about just the function of that, particularly with the sheriff not being in the facility anymore once they move out, from what we understand, that the courts did rely upon the sheriff's staff to support them in quite a few instances.
The sheriff's staff might not be in there, but corrections officers are still in the building. I mean, they're the ones who are usually the ones responding to any kind of emergent situation, because they're in the building.
Well, when they move out of building 3 as a part of the renovation project we're doing, I mean, at least my understanding is at this point, there is not going to be an area left for sheriff staff other than basically an office for the sheriff himself.
Corrections is not moving out, though. I mean, they're still doing the transport, and they're still going to be in those buildings.
Are they still gonna use the downstairs detention area to house prisoners during the daytime that are being shuttled back and forth to court?
Yes, that process.
So I think
will
that's
still
what
be the same.
the commissioner is referring to. We're gonna have that presence there all the time that the courts are in session. I don't understand why we can't have one spot. I don't think we have to expand anything. I don't think you have to build outside the buildings where we've got now, take the coffee shop and put whatever equipment we need there, just have that scan. It can be outside as far as it's undercover, and people just come through there. They'll go either into Superior Court or hang a left and go to District Court, and we can get around all those extra
Yeah, Rick is working
FTE positions.
with the construction team that has a security consultant that helps put these, what's plausible together. And then he goes to the stakeholder group and he talks through those options. And so it's not necessarily Rick saying, this is a good idea, it's a bad idea.
No,
He's running it through the gamut of different perspectives and.
but we've got to fund it.
Oh, absolutely. So what he brought forward last time were options that based on the stakeholders and the security experts, increased staffing. And so that had some challenges because budget constraints. So he went back to look at how do we come up with an option that is staff neutral, uses the current staff, that the security consultant says, yeah, that would work, and the stakeholders say, yeah, that would work. The only caveat is stakeholders are saying that would work, but we still want more security because the current security that we have is inadequate. And so, but I think you're all aware of those conversations. Just want to make sure we're representing them.
I guess I'm just trying to figure out how it's even, how is it relevant that you couldn't independently screen building one? We were never talking about that. Like, we were always talking about it as being a central point toward the complex, which you said is permissible.
I think that comes up when he's saying, okay, well, we'll just individually screen 2 and 3 then. But then building 1 doesn't get screened because then they're separated. But when there's a collection point and they're all together, then building 1 gets lumped in with 2 and 3 and they get screened.
But we wouldn't have gone to that. We wouldn't have landed there anyway, because the whole point was cost neutral security staffing. And obviously, if you're adding another building, if you're keeping all the ones you're screening now and adding another one to screen, obviously that's an increase in staff.
So doing
And we've never
nothing
had
different essentially is kind of the simple option, right?
Right, and in that conversation, it wasn't necessarily Rick that was bringing up the screening, it was the stakeholders that were saying, okay, if you screen those buildings, can we look at screening these buildings? So he's managing the expectations of the stakeholders, and what he started off with is what they
So is there a downside to just, we save the fencing, we keep the staffing of security status quo. What's the downside to that?
To the option he's presenting? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah,
Rick, are there any downsides to the option you're presenting?
For buildings 2 and 3, there are no downsides to it. Building 1 would not have the screened security, so that, I guess that would be the downside.
And that's the prosecutor's office and the clerk's office.
Prosecuting and pretrial services, yes.
And pretrial services is in building 4 right now, they're not screened. Prosecutor is partly in Superior Court, but they have other offices that aren't screened.
Correct.
Commissioner's office is not screened and has never been screened. And I would think that the security around legislative body would be far more, high octane, high emotion type of situations than pretrial services, for example.
Can I offer one sort of operational change, and that is related to pretrial services, that they currently have space in building 2 where they do work with clients specifically, and they're in close proximity to the security, that screening area. When that shifts, there is no space for them in building 2 or 3, as I understand it. So their meeting with clients will happen in building 1, which then won't have the benefit of that security personnel. And that's just I think, a logistical issue that I know Rick and team are aware of.
Is the prosecutor's office opposed to being in an unscreened building?
They are not.
And unscreened doesn't mean the same as doesn't have access to security personnel, because they're still on a campus with security personnel.
Yeah, I think,
They will still have panic buttons.
and I think what Rick is trying to be sensitive of is the stakeholders have been very clear with him. We want more staff, we want more security, and so, he doesn't, in talking with him, he doesn't want to misrepresent. That's not necessarily what the commission asked him to come back with. It's a conversation that he wants to be mindful of.
Commissioner Mejia?
I apologize, but the fact that they're bringing up additional staffing concerns during this process to me is just absolutely sideways. I, if they had these concerns, could have come up during the budget process last year. I didn't see any security. I didn't see any security requests the year before that. This project, I mean, like I said last time, it's supposed to be about like the needs, and it's becoming a lot about the wants, and requesting additional staffing at this point, or trying to put the board in a situation where if we go through with this, that they're gonna be demanding that we add additional security staffing. I will not be put in that position.
Gotcha. And so, thank you, Commissioner Mejia, for those comments, and that's why we're thankful that Rick went back and spent several days working with the group to come back with a staff-neutral option. But if there's more conversation about wanting to look at other things, we are happy to hear what the commission says and take that back.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out if we directed to go with this idea of no fencing, just keep the same security setup, who are we making unhappy with that?
Gotcha.
I'm trying to figure that out, because I'm not hearing you say prosecutor's okay being in an unscreened building.
Right.
I guess the clerk's in there too, but, where's the downside to that? Sounds like we save some money on the fencing. We don't mess with the security arrangements, so nobody's worried about, is it gonna be better, is it gonna be worse? It just stays the same. So is that the right thing to do?
Well, we received consensus by all the different groups that are gonna be in buildings 1, 2, and 3, that they were in agreement that we could and should move forward with keeping the screening in building 2 and 3 with slight configuration changes. The one agency group that is affected by this is what Rob already brought up, and that is with pretrial, where when they do have clientele, right now they do have a small space in, I believe it's building 2, that requires the clientele to come through screening before they would actually meet. The design team could certainly look at the space layout that we have in building 2 and see if there would be a possibility to, again, carve out a small space for that particular operations of pretrial services, so that that operation could be, if you will, behind a screening scenario. We have a few attorney work areas that are on the first floor that could potentially be converted to that. We would just have to kind of go through that process and see if the space actually works. But other than that, all the other groups are, and even pretrial, not there. They would like to be behind screening, but they understand the situation and are to be on board with us going forward.
I think the backdrop here is no one's happy with this option. It was more of, can they live with the option? So I think Rick doesn't want to oversell it and say everyone's good with this. It was more of, are we able to make this work, understanding the constraints of we're not going to increase staffing. What they would want is a different security setup with increased staffing, and that's what we've been clear, based on Commissioner's direction, we can't do that based on the budget constraints.
Commissioner Mejia, sorry, hand.
lipstick.
I'll wait for my comments, Commissioner Munster.
Okay,
I don't see the big downside of putting a fence on one side of that walkway and putting the security in one spot, right in front of Superior Court.
and the goal there is just to kind of more efficient staffing.
Yeah,
Sure, those two buildings.
right, instead of having two separate security locations, have one, and have it outside.
Can that really, I mean,
But
our equipment is subjected to rain and.
Well, no, it's
moisture.
outside, it's in covered area, I mean, you could have a wall, so you don't have, rain blowing in. Heck, people would be healthier, they'd be working outside. Next pandemic, they wouldn't even have to wear a mask.
And the issue with the fencing, if you remember, again, this is just going over the past presentation. Rick, correct me if I'm wrong, but about the concerns of access and what had to be fenced so that folks didn't
Double fencing.
throw things over. I mean, they did quite a bit of work to get to the last presentation. And that last presentation, unfortunately, many of the options had increased staffing. So hearing the commissioner's clear direction of, we don't have the resources for that, so let's go back and see what we can do to live within a staff-neutral model. That's what they've come up with.
We're still trying to do a 21st century remodel with 20th century money, it isn't gonna pan out very well. We just don't have the resources, the way we're doing it, to make it all work.
Yeah, we're gonna be unhappy with it in 5 years. We're gonna be unhappy with it in 5 months, no matter what we build. I don't like any of it.
Yeah, and in that discussion, Rick, I don't know, Chair, if now's the time, but
Yeah.
there was a question asked about increased square footage, so that you understand what the scope is of what people are getting from this project. We can.
Yeah, and I saw this and it's great, which is exactly what I asked for. And
Yes.
I'd asked the board to look at it because it feels like the conversations we're having, we're talking through the sticky points. And
Right.
so it feels like we're accomplishing nothing. I just wanted a summary of like, here's what we're accomplishing. I mean, it may not be worth it, but at least we should know. It's been a long time since we've even looked at this, just to look at kind of why we're doing this to begin with and all the space upgrades that each department is getting. I just wanted all the commissioners to kind of have this in their minds as they think through all the challenges so that they can weigh.
Right.
We've just been stuck in like all the problematic areas for several months without ever, and I don't even think this has been discussed since Commissioner Fournier and Klaus have taken over, kind of what we're getting out of this whole project, which is, some pretty significant space upgrades for the various, district court was kind of, I think from our former study, they were the most constrained for their needs, and they're getting, like over 50% upgrade in square footage for their operations, and that's important. I mean, that's why we're going through all this stuff. But Commissioner Mejia, go ahead.
Thank you. So I'm actually going to kind of bring in, I guess, another twist, but I'm not sure if we're going to talk about the space, and Rick is going to go over that, and my comments can wait till the after that.
Commissioner, I think what might also be helpful is I asked Rick to put together some rough order of magnitude costs for the same square footage increases if we were to lease or to build, for the discussion, because it goes to what you're saying about we are dealing with some of the sticky issues. This is not an ideal situation, but what dollars would be required to actually come up with a different option, and they're substantial.
Yes. So, I'll go ahead and go through this sheet that Commissioner Menzer was just mentioning there with maybe a little bit more analysis and detail to it. I guess I'd like to start it out again, just to remind the group that we are working with Plan B, and Plan B is a solution to get us through the next 7 to 10 years until hopefully we can get a more permanent plan that will bring the county maybe 50 years of the space that they need. That was the original plan back in 2019, 2020, when we were planning for the new courthouse administration complex. So with that said, just as you've already noted, there is significantly more space. For all of the different groups that are listed on here, we are increasing the total amount of square footage by over 40%. And Commissioner Menzer, as you mentioned, District Court honestly was one of them that was squeezed the most, and they're almost at 60% in regards to the increase of their space. So just a couple of maybe items to think about here. The existing space that these different groups are in right now, they occupy about 65,000 square feet. With the new design that we have in place right now, there's going to be a total of about 93,000 square feet. So that's that 43% increase of space.
Can you rate those numbers again?
Sure. So the existing is 65,000 square feet. With our new design, we will be occupying about 93,000 square feet. So that's an increase of about 28,000 square feet of space for these departments in total. If we were to construct a new building, that would be that 28,000 square feet, which would be the expansion we're talking about here. The cost to do that would be about $43 million to construct a new building for that. Also, we need to really keep in mind, though, that's just a number to reference. The actual number to be able to provide these different spaces in a situation where we have groups of departments that have basically consolidated together, that $43 million would be a little bit more than that, because the $43 million would really only build the space, but we wouldn't take the expansion, for example, of the Superior Court. We wouldn't take part of that 28,000 square feet and just build them one courtroom. And then in that same building, do an expansion for the prosecuting attorney of 7,000 square feet. So the programming part of it wouldn't work. But I wanted to just give an idea in regards to if we were literally to have just had to build something new to accommodate the expansion, that would be over $40 million for that. Now, if we were to, for example, have looked at a lease facility for the total expansion of 93.
Before you depart that, if I could.
Yes, please.
I just want to underscore your point that you couldn't just build that square footage in isolation.
Right.
Because what we're saying is the increases of all those departments, operations, you can't just go and have an annex and then now their operations are bifurcated. But you're just giving us a cost like per square footage.
Exactly.
That's a rough order of magnitude of this is what it would look like.
And I guess I have to go back to my earlier question as to follow up on what you're commenting on. If we're building 40% more, what are we paying now for upkeep and maintenance and everything that goes into that building? And we haven't been able to keep the building up to what it should be. So can we afford another 40% more? And that's not even talking about inflation. We're just talking about 40%.
Space we can't maintain.
Yeah, it's space we can't maintain. We don't have the resources to maintain it that I can see. If we're gonna charge to each department X number of dollars, 40% more, let's just say, than each one of them are paying now.
Just research that question, Commissioner, because now I understand what you're asking.
Isn't it really what we're paying for this building is really that cost? Those are the same buildings, and so that doesn't, so really the additional cost we've incurred by being here is that extra.
So it's not extra square footage being built, it's extra square footage being
For
occupied.
each individual office's
because
budget
we
may go up a
vacate.
little.
Eventually, yes.
My hang up, though, is
Eventually,
like,
it'll equal out, but
it's still,
meantime.
you know, paying for something for 20+ years that you're only gonna be, that's only gonna be useful for 5. You know, are you better off spending $120 million now on something that you can use for 35, 40 years than spending $50 million on something that you can only use for 5, but you're gonna pay for
You are,
20?
but we didn't have 120 million
So,
available.
I know, not right now,
Yeah.
but
I wonder if we're just throwing money down the rat hole right now.
good money,
That
yeah, after
upgrade.
bad.
And wait until we develop enough trust in the community to get them to pass a bond issue to give us the money that we need to do it right. But the public's gonna have to vote on it, and we gotta have a plan. We can't have a concept. We have to have a plan when we move forward. So I think we're headed down the wrong path by spending this. It's not even 50 million anymore, is it? What are we down to now? What's this whole remodel gonna theoretically cost?
Well, I mean,
What's
50
your
million,
budget?
the $50 million
Is
is
it
the
50?
total,
Okay.
total budget.
I mean, the buy-in power of that 50 million has depreciated by 20% since we started the process. You know, so that's the inflationary cost of doing business.
Chair, do you want Rick to continue, because he has one more, not just new build, but he also has what if we were to lease
Yeah.
that same space?
So,
Thank you, Chair.
so if we were to lease 93,000 square feet of space in lieu of us doing the renovations that we're talking about right now, for a 10-year lease, that, the county would basically be paying about $47 million over a 10-year period for similar to what we would be getting with our renovation project.
And are you saying that that lease would come ready to go, or would they have tenant improvements that are 24 million added onto that?
No, that includes the tenant improvements, and just to give you an idea of the cost, I believe that I had estimated about 18 or 19 million dollars of tenant improvements to be a part of that. Just rule of thumb, building a courtroom is about $1 million per courtroom, and we would be building 11 courtrooms, so there's $11 million just to build the courtrooms, which really only leaves $7, maybe $8 million to build out the entire rest of the offices that would be needed for the other.
I think we're in a no-win situation. Where's that lipstick? Well,
And for whatever it's worth, if we were to build a new building that would be that 93,000 square feet, including property costs of probably about $15 million, you're talking about $140 million to build a new 73,000 square foot building that would provide everything that we're doing with the renovation.
you know, before we had a couple of acquisitions up on the hill, I think the Ming study said that that was $100 million value of that property up there. But then we had another realty group that came in and said, oh no, it's only worth $7 million. So how does that fit? How can there be such discrepancies in what something might be worth versus another group, oh no, it's only worth this? And you have to figure in what the upgrades would be. And I think the Ming thing, the upgrades were 20 million or 40 million, I don't recall now. But, I mean, there's such discrepancies in the numbers. It boggles my mind. I can't understand it. I think we do need more than just a few minutes to be sitting down here. We're going into a couple other topics this morning. Unless we're gonna spend the whole time on kicking this around, get a whiteboard out.
No, I think we can always bring this back, but
Yeah,
Chair,
I think.
our desire was to come back with a staff-neutral approach to the security. At the same time, try to answer some of the questions, but if there's a desire to go into some of these topics in more detail, staff would be happy to come back at a later time.
Thank you.
the more, every time the presentation comes on board, I think I get a little bit more anxious. One of the things that is on my list is a long-term plan for our courthouse, not just the courthouses over there, but just our county operations as a whole. And, when we took this, did the move to the atrium, it was as a short-term gap to kind of keep us over until we were able to put a proposal in front of the voters. But with, just the nature of how people are dealing with inflation and just the other, I don't think that if we were to invest these $50 million to do this upkeep with these buildings without actually investing in, the roof or the HVAC or just the main things, that it's going to get passed through to the voters. So I guess where I'm coming from is let's put something in front of the ballot, because I'm hearing from all the stakeholders and none of them are happy, none of them are satisfied. And I'm to the point where okay, fine, let's put it in front of the voters. Let's put a long-term courthouse plan in front of the voters. Let them vote on it. And if it doesn't pass, then the $50 million is all you get, right? So, because at this point, we're trying to, it's kind of like the budget and the road fund. We're trying to stretch everything out as much as possible, making sure that the impacts that everyone is receiving are as less as possible. And yet the board is just getting railroaded at every turn with every decision point. And $50 million is a lot of money that we're going to be investing into these buildings. And it's only getting us just a tiny bit there, really, right? Just trying to measure up some of the needs, but the real big needs, like the roof and the HVAC, and those aren't getting addressed because we're trying to satisfy the wants of all the stakeholders. And so where I'm at is, let's put it in front of the voters. I am just to the point where I guess I'm just frustrated, and I know staff has done an amazing job, Rick. I'm right there, Rick, you really have, from where this project was to where it is now, I'm really appreciative of the work that you've done, and this is not towards, but I'm just nervous that this investment is a really big investment that the board is doing, and all we hear is, well, when are you gonna put it in front of the ballot? Fine, let's put it in front of the ballot.
Say the 50 million goes into renovating those buildings, we're still here, correct? There's still no long-term solution for us then too, and everybody in this building. So this expense still exists, and for God knows how long. And I appreciate the work you're doing, and I want to apologize for you being put in the situation to have to do this. So my questions are not a reflection of anything that you do, so I don't envy your job, but I appreciate the work that you're doing.
We're here to bring information to the board.
Yeah, I know, but you get attached to things when you're working on it, and it's hard to I would have a hard time you got a tough job, is what I'm saying, and I would have a hard time doing it, so I appreciate what you're doing, but this is, I don't like the scenario, but I'm new to this, and again, it doesn't make sense to me to get into this long-term financial obligation for something that doesn't really solve any problems. So I have a hard time with it.
I think
I was just gonna say that the plan for the long term is part of the development of the overarching long-term facilities plan that Rick and the capital project team are working on. That's not ready to bring to you today, but eventually will be. So it's not like we've abandoned that. We are working on a plan. And it was known when we acquired this building and moved in that we had to have that plan. It's known as we work on the renovations on the hilltop that we need that plan. So it is something we're working on. That would not stop you from putting this item on the ballot, should the board choose to do so.
If the measure, oh, go ahead, Kenny.
And as the new county manager, I am getting up to speed on the history of how we got to here to today. Rob was super helpful in bringing out some old rendering boards from the archives. They had a little layer of dust on them. Had a great conversation with Judge Buckley, and have talked to some other staff. And Rick and I are going to be setting some time up. And so I think that's important to figure out where we're at, how we got to today, where we're at. And Commissioner Mejia, to your point about what is our long-term plan, because we have to have one in the context of, and I think that's the commissioner's was their plan all along, knowing that there are some immediate needs today, and we have some challenging buildings that we're working through, and so trying to look at where do we go from here. But we're here today because of options and different constraints everyone was under getting here, and I'm still learning about what those all are, but it'll be a process.
So I'm just curious, I guess I'll look at you, but whoever's got the answer can chime in. If the board paused this project, put the courthouse measure on the November ballot, it's 5 months away, what would have, and then with the contingency that it would move forward immediately if the voters rejected the proposition, what would a 5-month pause in what we're doing, what would be the ramifications of that in terms of what's already in motion and the contractors that are under contract and bond money that's sitting in accounts and all, I mean, what are the is that even a realistic thing that we could do? What would be, are there too many negatives to that to even contemplate it?
I would want, there are impacts. I would want Rick to have the time to put that into scope, but you identified some, and Commissioner Edwards did as well from an inflationary standpoint.
Yeah.
They're at the point where they're looking at pre-ordering materials to lock in pricing today because things change, but we can put all that together and bring that back to the board in detail. But Commissioner, to your point, there will be impacts.
Well, I think there's 2 commissioners interested in hearing that. I think there would need to be a 3rd commissioner interested in hearing that before we'd want you to go off, you know.
Gotcha, thank you.
Is there another commissioner that would like to hear?
I want to hear that.
Okay,
So I don't know who's
Commissioner Klaus?
I agree. I would also like to hear that. I've been listening, but I agree with everything I'm hearing my seatmates say about the concerns. And I'd be interested, Commissioner Minzer, in what you brought up, which was brought up at the last conversation as well, about kind of a briefing on where we started with all of this, because being new, it just sounds like there are so many valid concerns, and it's hard for me to hop on board with any of the plans being discussed without hearing that initial context and background in like a full conversation.
We can definitely plan that out. I will say that not advocating, but just communicating that we delay the project, they will have, because they're right now scheduling and they're teeing everything up. It will have impacts, but we can bring that back for a full conversation about what specifically those are, not just anecdotally.
Okay, so it sounds like we need kind of a extended period where we kind of talk about how we got here
Yes.
and walk through that, and then another, what that potential option of going to the voters would look like.
How we got here, how did we go to the voters, what are the impacts potentially for waiting, and how do we meld all that together?
Okay, anything else we need to address this morning? Looking at my
On the-
teammates on this topic?
This topic, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Looks like we've got a
Thank you.
direction. Okay, next up is an executive session pursuant to RCW 4231-10-1I to discuss with legal counsel representing the agency matters relating to agency enforcement actions, or to discuss with legal counsel representing the agency litigation or potential litigation to which the agency governing body or member acting in an official capacity is or is likely to become a party, when public knowledge regarding the discussion is likely to result in an adverse legal or financial consequence to the agency. Audit report response is the topic. It's 60 minutes allotted. We're at 9:54, so we'll be in executive session until 10:55.
Where's legal? Is legal here? I mean, I can't imagine we're gonna have a session without an attorney here.
Okay, we're back with the Board of County Commissioners work session for May 29th, 2024. It's 11:03 a.m. and we're picking up with item 3 on the agenda, which is Civil Service Commission Overview, an informational session for the board. Have HR team here and that's the county manager.
Commissioners, thanks so much for the opportunity to have our leadership putting this together. I'll just hand over to you and you can introduce yourselves and go from there.
Good morning, Commissioners. Maria Ponte, Director of Human Resources. With me is Wayne Jones. He wears several hats in the HR department, but today he is representing the Civil Service Commission as Chief Examiner. Purpose for our attendance today is to provide the commissioners with an overview of the Civil Service Commission, its roles and responsibilities. And with that, I'll hand it off to Wayne.
All right. Good morning, everybody.
Chair, just wanted to point out that Sheriff is joining us too, so.
Okay, Sheriff Sanders and Sheriff Pearsall, thank you for joining us.
All right. Good morning, everybody. We'll start off with the history of the Civil Service Commission. So, Civil Service for Counties in Washington State was established in 1958. The first Civil Service Commission consists of 3 Olympia area businessmen appointed in January 1959. The information's in the slide. The original Civil Service rules established in 1959 are kept by the Chief Examiner. I brought them with me if anybody would like to take a look at the original rules.
Yeah, actually.
All right. So between 1959 and today, obviously, things are significantly different to include changes in the laws and changes in staffing. Today's Civil Service Commission and staff, we have Jenny Roberts, who is the Civil Service Commission Chair, John Martin, who's one of the commissioners, Tina Browning, who is a newly appointed Civil Service Commissioner. She has not yet joined in any of the Civil Service Commission meetings. I'll be making sure she gets the appropriate training prior to the June meeting that's coming up. Myself, the Chief Examiner, and then we have a fairly robust Civil Service staff. We use multiple people in human resources to provide support in the recruitment process. So Civil Service, as I stated, was established by RCW. It is governed by RCW 41.14, which is Civil Service for Sheriff's Office. There are different civil service RCWs. There's for the state, there's for cities and towns, and for the Sheriff's Office. So these are specific rules and related only to county sheriffs. The RCW specifies that the Civil Service Commission specifies Civil Service Commission appointments, terms, qualifications, powers, duties, the qualifications and duties of the Chief Examiner, what is considered classified and unclassified service, and requirements for examinations, creating eligibility lists, certifying eligibles for hire, filling vacancies, and the like. If anybody has any questions as we're going along, please feel free to jump in. Civil Service rules. Civil Service staff update and maintain the Civil Service rules. The rules are required by RCW 41.14060, and they specify how Thurston County Civil Service performs the functions to comply with the legal requirements of the RCW. Under those rules, the Chief Examiner, myself, but our rules also identify the Chief Examiner includes those people designated to perform those duties. So other people in human resources staff provide guidance and advice to the Civil Service Commission and Thurston County Sheriff's Office. We develop and maintain all files necessary to completion of Civil Service Commission business in accordance with Public Records Act. We administer and maintain the Civil Service rules and the classification plan. We develop, review, approve, and implement the administration of recruiting and examination plans for new hires and promotion processes. We review and provide veterans preference consistent with RCW 41.04.010. We establish eligibility lists. We review appeals of rejection and of applications and eligibility list removals. And we certify eligibles for hire and promotion. So roles and responsibilities of the civil service examiner in the sheriff's office. So when it comes to recruitment, examination, and eligibility list, the chief examiner verifies applicant qualifications, conducts initial screening, administers job testing. We place applicants who meet all of the testing standards on a ranked list. The sheriff or sheriff's designee conducts phase 1 background investigations, which include criminal, financial, polygraph, etc. Based on findings, they can request that the chief examiner remove candidates. When it comes to vacancies and appointments, the chief examiner, upon request of the sheriff or designee, certifies the names of the eligible candidates who are able to be hired, and the sheriff or designee, upon receiving the certified list, may select any of the names on the list to make a conditional offer of hire. They will conduct phase 2 of the background investigation, which is essentially going to be medical examinations, and candidates who pass phase 2 are hired or appointed by the sheriff.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So who is the chief, like the civil service examiner?
That
Is
is
it,
me.
so that you are the civil service examiner, so you're the, basically like a neutral party who's not
Yes.
sheriff's office or, okay. Thank you.
All right, moving deeper into the recruitment process. So for civil service, what we do is we accept applications and we do the evaluation of qualifications for any position. We conduct examinations, or we can also hire contractors to conduct examinations. Applicants that have passing scores are screened against our pre-employment screening standards. Now, those standards are based on requirements of law as well as what is approved by the Civil Service Commission. If an applicant is deemed to not meet the pre-employment screening standards, then we reject that application. If they're fully qualified, then the applicant is placed on an eligibility list. That list is ranked in order of test scores. Veterans' preference is applied if eligible in accordance with the relevant RCW, which means that as of today, when people receive veterans' preference, it will add to their passing score additional percentage and will essentially move them up higher on the list. Eligibility list applications and all other attached or relevant documents are sent to the sheriff's office to begin the background investigation. Excuse me. So the sheriff's office conducts background investigations essentially in 2 phases. Phase 1 is going to be records checks, interviews, and polygraph. They're going to be looking at criminal history, driving record, employment history, financial history. They'll be doing interviews with candidate, employers, references, et cetera, and conducting a polygraph. Now, to be clear, polygraphs are required under state law for sworn positions. Those are those that get sworn into office. For certifying, so once they've completed phase 1 and they're ready to fill a vacancy, the sheriff or designated representative submits a written request to the chief examiner for certification. I then certify the top 5 names. That's codified under RCW 41.14.060. And that's by score. Now, they're not ranked by score, it's just any of the top 5. The sheriff may select any of those names on the list and make a conditional offer of hire. The candidate accepts the offer. That candidate moves into phase 2 of the background investigation. Phase 2, as I had stated before, is essentially the medical examinations. So if a person, for example, with a psychological evaluation does not meet appropriate standards, then they will be removed from further consideration. So speaking of removals, So during the background process, at any phase of the background process, if a candidate is deemed by the sheriff to not meet the employment standards, the sheriff requests removal of the candidate through civil service. So what happens is we review. We have a multi-tiered process for a request for reviewing a request for removal. If we determine that the information that's provided by the sheriff's office merits disqualification for one or more reasons specified in those employment standards, the candidate is removed from the eligibility list, is notified of the removal. If we determine that a candidate does not merit disqualification, then the candidate is retained on the eligibility list, and the sheriff's office is notified that the candidate is not removed. Now, if somebody is removed, the candidate is notified, but they're also given opportunities to appeal. The first level of appeal is to me. Now, to be clear, that's one of the reasons why we have multiple HR staff doing this. So I'm not the person who does an initial assessment of a removal, and then here's the appeal and makes a decision on my own removal. So initial removals are done by other HR staff. And then, if there's an appeal, it comes to me. So I'll give the candidates the opportunity. So as stated, if they're removed for not meeting the employment standards, the candidate is notified of the removal and the appeal process. The candidate can provide additional information, and then I determine whether to reinstate or uphold that removal. If reinstated, the candidate's name is added back to the list and the sheriff's office is notified. If the removal is upheld, though, the candidate is notified, provided information on how to appeal to the Civil Service Commission. And then that takes us to the final step of the appeal process. Appeals to removals can go before the commission. If removal is appealed, an executive session is conducted in accordance with RCW 42.30.110G. During the meeting, the candidate may present any information they feel is relevant to the Civil Service Commission, and the sheriff's office provides a background investigator to discuss the reasons for the removal. The Civil Service Commission convenes an open public meeting after they've heard all the information, and then votes on whether to reinstate the candidate or affirm the removal. If affirmed, the candidate is removed from the eligibility list. If reinstated, the candidate is placed on the eligibility list and is eligible to be certified for further vacant positions. Similarly, we have a process for promotions. In the Civil Service Classified Service, all promotional positions are filled through a promotional testing process. So what that means is we don't hire from the outside, for the most part, a sergeant or a lieutenant or a captain. Deputy sheriffs or corrections deputies who are hired get to test when they meet all the qualifications for the next higher position. So what happens is when we're conducting promotional testing, interested Thurston County Sheriff's Office employees submit a letter of intent to test, which is screened against those promotional qualifications. Everyone who meets qualifications is invited to test. Testing may consist of a single test or multiple successive tests, and those who pass all the required tests are placed on an eligibility list. When the sheriff wants to fill a vacancy, civil service staff certify the top 5 names on that eligibility list. And again, just as before, the sheriff or designee can select any one of those top 5 based on who they feel would be the best person to fill the vacancy. Another aspect of civil service, and this doesn't come up too often, and you'll see exactly why, is grievances and appeals of discipline. So to be clear, all positions covered by the administrative support staff collective bargaining agreement, disciplinary grievance must be handled through the union grievance process. It's been negotiated in the contract, so they cannot appeal it to the Civil Service Commission. For all other CBAs, the disciplined employees must elect at step 3 of the grievance process whether to pursue an appeal to the Civil Service Commission or continue with contractual grievance procedure, but may not utilize both. It's referred to as a one-bite provision. And then finally, as we had stated before, we're responsible for the classification plan of the sheriff's office. So we update and maintain the sheriff's office classification plan, and that includes creating new classifications when needed. That is my overview of the civil service process, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Good overview.
That was good.
That was a good overview. Like, I had gone through this, I had a lot of, like, I was like, what is a civil commission? Like, what do they do? Like, I've heard about it multiple times, but I was a little bit lost on exactly what their role was, so, thank you for this.
Sheriff Sanders, did you have any additional info you wanted to throw in on this topic?
Just that Wayne and HR have done a really good job of helping us really refine this process. As you guys remember, when I took over, there's just a lot of confusion. I had to go through the same learning process as each of you did because I had no idea. And I remember coming back, you know, we had that long conversation about we got the third-party vendor for backgrounds, and I think at that point in time we had 5 background investigators, and I was super frustrated with Wayne and HR, and then we had this giant meeting with everyone, and they're like, "No, you guys are still just slow." So it's been good to learn more about this process, and it also gives you guys an idea of like when we have candidates who aren't meeting the qualifications that we want, but they still aren't quote unquote disqualified, that they just sit on the list and they clog these lists up. And so working with HR and civil service, it's been good to get good qualified candidates who meet our community values forward in this process and really expedite our hiring. So I'm just very grateful of the Civil Service Commission and everything they've been doing for us.
Anybody else? Thank you, Sheriff. Well, looks like we're good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great info.
You got this antique book.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is good.
It is.
It's a nice folder too.
Is most of this current?
No.
Did you sign the original copy?
Oh, boy.
Thank you, Wayne. Good job.
Good job. Thank you. Item is a commissioner items for the agenda this morning. If there's anything. Nope. Okay, we're back at 1 o'clock with Squaxin Island Tribal Council. Till then, we're adjourned.
And that's not a lunch thing, right? It's just after lunch.
Just after lunch, we'll have some